This is Ron Klopfenstein, and we're on the hot seat on a Media Monday. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today we'll be talking to Rocco LaDuca. He's a journalist and a co-host of Talk of the Town on Talk 100.7 FM. He wrote a series of articles called The Mob Files, but he was a reporter at the Utica Observer-Dispatch. Later in the show, we'll talk to Michael Brown, who's involved with the organizing of this weekend's No Kings Rally in Rome, and Sheila Dion, who is going to join us today from Aaron's Angels, will be calling in next week. I screwed up with the time for her to call in because I do that sometimes with numbers. But we have Rocco here today to talk about the series of articles that you wrote back in 2009 at the Observer Dispatch. Tell us what is the Mob Files?
Well, this was, like you said, it was 15 years ago, 2009.
Right.
It was at the Observer Dispatch for 10 years until about 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So halfway in my career at the OD, it was 2009 was the 50th anniversary of when the Observer Dispatch and the Daily Press got the Pulitzer Prize. That's really why we wrote this.
Yeah.
It was to honor and acknowledge the Observer Dispatch won the Pulitzer Prize, this award for journalism.
A huge deal.
Yeah, at the time, I mean, for any paper it is.
Yeah.
Maybe now it's kind of like everything's all crazy with the news, but at the time, there was a period
well,
where
it's still a big deal. I would think a Pulitzer Prize. I would take it.
Yeah. But the Pulitzer Prize, the OD got it for exposing the corruption and vice and prompting these investigations from a social standpoint and a journalistic standpoint to essentially bring back, save the city of Utica from organized crime, from corruption, from police corruption, from government corruption. And that's essentially what prompted, at the time, 50 years back then, in 1959, for the paper to, we'll get into all the details, but essentially to save the city from itself.
Right.
And that's what journalism's all about. The newspaper got acknowledged for that.
What is it all about?
What's that?
What is journalism all about?
Oh, journalism's all about being the watchdog of government, of your elected officials, of corruption, of looking out for the little man who doesn't have a voice, being the voice of them.
Yep.
And essentially righting wrongs, and that's kind of what really came out of the whole story of the Utica Observer Dispatch Daily Press getting the Pulitzer Prize back then, is because it was really cracking down on something that I think the public had become complacent with. Back then there was organized crime and the Utica mob and the gambling and prostitution. Everybody was kind of okay with it, even all these murders that were happening, because it didn't really affect them. As long as they were happy, everybody had their jobs, people went to have fun. If they wanted to go to a prostitute, they went to a prostitute. And you could judge them for that.
That's kind of nice that it was convenient.
Right. But everybody's like, well, as long as I don't see it, you do what you got to do. So that ultimately, though, as it escalated and you realize that there were the police were being paid off, and the government was using government money to essentially benefit themselves. And then ultimately what happened when the Utica mafia in 1957 really got exposed on a national scale down in Appalachian, that's when, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the politics of it.
That was kind of in many ways like the peak of all this Appalachian thing.
Yeah, that was when you ripped the scab off the mafia.
Right.
And you realize these are real guys, real goons. Suits and ties and nice shoes that were meeting to figure out how to organize their business, essentially, as things were changing in the mafia world. And ultimately, when it got exposed down in the southern tier near Binghamton, where
it made the Daily News.
It made the newspaper.
Yeah.
But the reason why
the newspaper is everywhere.
The newspaper is national
issue,
right? Yeah. That you couldn't deny the mafia anymore, and that's when, because you had the Falcone brothers, Joe and Salvatore Falcone, that were the names among those dozens of people that were nabbed down in Appalachian, that because they were from Utica, the eyes went to Utica. Eyes went to New York City, but ultimately. Utica was singled out because the governor at the time, and
Averell Harriman wanted to run for president. Right. So he wanted the Democratic nomination. And one of the things he wanted to kind of prove to the country, I guess, was that he was going to be tough on crime.
Right. That if you, how did all of this, how's all this crime, all of this underworld murders
in
and
like
stuff
upstate
going on, right?
Utica, New York, in his own state. So he kind of wanted to like show people that he wasn't gonna,
Right.
Take this sitting down, right?
Right, but they should have gone after, and some people say, well, why don't you go after New York City? That's where all the mafia is.
Why didn't he? What
I
do
think that
people
was
think?
the politics of it. That was like, well, we got to make this look good for us, but we don't need to go after them. We don't need to have to go after the.
It'd be
big
harder.
guys, right? Well, there's a lot more at stake.
More complicated
right.
too.
Yeah.
So he probably kind of thought it'd be easier to kind of like take care of this upstate and make a show of it.
Yeah,
And
I think it was more of the whole issue with the investigations that then started in Utica at the time with Robert Fisher. Really never revealed or confirmed any mafia ties. Never got the Falcones. All it did was pretty much crack down and reveal the organized crime that was going on as far as corruption.
Kind of like the miasma, kind of like of what it was happening without actually like they never pinned it on any particular person, right? But they kind of like exposed that it was happening, and it kind of like the sense that I got was that the people of Utica were kind of like getting to a point where they were embarrassed by this, kind of like enough is enough.
Well, they were embarrassed. Yeah, they were embarrassed by the negative publicity when a newspaper called the Utica the Sin City of the East.
Yep.
And people were very insulted by that because it's like, we're definitely not Las Vegas. We have gambling and prostitution like any other city. Why are you picking on us? And that's why it was the politics of it, really driven out of Albany to target Utica to say we're going after the mob, but they really didn't. They went after corruption, and they did reveal corrupt officials and gambling and corrupt police, and several police members went to, including a deputy chief, went to prison for a few years. So there definitely was some wrongs that were righted. No, it didn't touch the mafia. Once it was over, the Falcones came back. Well, Joe Falcone came back.
Yeah, we're gonna talk more about him. Some of these great quotes. I just love this Joe Falcone guy. so that kind of sort of like where things peaked in the late 50s, like the climax of the action, kind of like the 62 people rounded up in Appalachian, southern New York State. That's when the governor was kind of cracking down and the whole Sin City of the East thing happened. But it also began back in the early 1900s, 1919, when Joe and Salvatore Falcone came to Utica. And it's interesting because I never realized that like there were two people that were so like, such a big deal had to do with this stuff. Interesting people too, like these two guys.
Salvatore was the older brother, then Joe is younger. They grew up, I think grew up in New York City. They came to Utica. I don't know what year they came here. But ultimately,
I think it was 1990, but I have notes everywhere.
They came here as very young men and somehow established themselves. I don't know too much about the start of that part, but ultimately, when Prohibition was put into play, like anywhere else, that's where the mafia and in this case, it would appear that the Falcones, at least based on the news reporting, the narratives, and the criminal cases that were out there, that the Falcones were kind of leading in the Utica area this illegal bootlegging of alcohol, and there were plenty of
like an opportunity for people to make money.
Well, that's where kind of if you look at the history of the Italians, the mafia.
No one was going to stop. No one was going to give up alcohol, so they were just buying.
No, they were exploiting it because it was a business, and for whatever reason, the Italians with mafia background, they knew how to run.
They were ready to go. So
and they found people who were willing to make this alcohol legally, buy their sugar, their goods from their grocers, make it, and then as they made it and sold it, then the Falcone, whoever was running these things, you could argue that the Falcones were accused of doing that, they would get a cut of it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, and there were, it was very strictly run, where you had people had to get, if they wanted to make and sell alcohol, they had to run it through, say the Falcones, just as part of the record at the time.
Yeah.
Then, if they tried to go outside this circle of people and try to make more money elsewhere, as you would, that's where, if you didn't give a cut back to the people who were in charge, the big guys, you'd get either beat up, you'd get your equipment smashed or damaged, or you get killed.
Yeah.
And then if you went too far, and if you tried to steal alcohol or things from other people, or if you tried to scam them, you got killed as well. So it was really nasty back then, because people was really tough.
I mean, they're colorful characters. I love to read about them and read their quotes and stuff. And I think for most people, probably some people that probably weren't involved in it, it didn't really affect them that much. But but they were bad.
You would just drink the alcohol if you wanted to drink it at these places that had it. But the people
they
who
were
made
bad
it,
if you messed with them.
Yeah,
If you crossed them.
The average citizen never messed with it.
Right,
it was the people who were making it that were essentially, I think, they're stories of innocent people who really didn't want to get involved in illegal stuff. But they knew that there was money to be made there. And when the people who were involved, kind of the muscle of these bootlegging groups, they were led by the Falcones or whoever, then they would kind of say, you sell us your sugar, or you sell us whatever items are part of it. If you don't, we're gonna cause you trouble. We're gonna smash your windows. We're gonna beat you up. So you had some people who otherwise wouldn't have gotten involved with, say, the mafia or whatever, but they felt they had to do it out of safety, and then they got caught up in the police thing, and oftentimes they were the ones, because they were really innocent people, that would flip for the police and snitch on them and say what was going on, and then they'd wind up in a canal,
and they kind of were victims, victims themselves, really, like caught between the two forces, kind of here. So,
and there was, I think it was in the, if you have his name off the top.
I might, because I have like post-its and highlight.
If it's an individual, it's just the way.
I probably know more than you at this point, because I just read it this morning.
All right, then I'll quiz you. What was the name of the individual, and what was the year? I think it was in the either the late 20s, or the 30s, where he was shot twice in the head and dumped
they thought it was a suicide.
The
suicide with quotes around it. Yes. I think I have that highlighted, but it's right here. So it's interesting because, like, at the time, it kind of shows that there was, like, amongst the officials,
complicity.
Because this is what I have highlighted here. So now this is many people in Utica. So this is, you interviewed Phil Bean, right, for this. So he's a historian. So he said many people in Utica. Is this the right place here? Well, this is I highlight this too. I would like this too here. So Utica had a 70-year tapestry of violence between 1920 and 1990, and people received mysterious. This writing is really good. People received mysterious phone calls and wound up dead a short time after. Men were shot in their bedclothes while rushing out to some mysterious beating, while others were found killed on rural roadways or stuffed into abandoned wells. And perhaps most curious of all was a man who was found floating in the Mohawk River in 1930. He was shot twice in the head and ruled as suicide, only to have his brother strangled with a cord several weeks after, as he began to ask questions. So this is like, these were the stakes. You could be shot in the head and dumped in the river and stuff.
If you started getting too close to either getting police there were police that would try to follow these individuals, try to figure it out. But then if the bad guys started to figure out who the police were and what was going on, then they had to be taken off and sent elsewhere because they didn't want them to get killed.
Right.
So there were the issues of the people getting killed because they knew too much, or they possibly believed that they were going to snitch on somebody. And then there was also, which later on was proven back through the Fisher investigations in the 60s, that police were being paid off to essentially either getting a cut of the business or to look the other way and not investigate. And when you have all of these murders, and ultimately one of the deputy chiefs, Vince Fiore, who went to prison, that at the time in the 40s when there was he was a gambling, I think, Fred Morelli, the Ace of Clubs,
Ace of Clubs
establishment back in East Utica, I think, in Culver. That he was shot and killed in his car outside of his place, and there was a little bit of concern at why aren't you finding out who killed this person? His homicide is still unsolved today, and the police at the time were saying, well, I'm not Dick Tracy.
I saw the call, yes.
And because it would appear that they didn't really want to solve some of these.
Yeah. So I can see like why the people like would at one time, like, we read this now, and like I read the stuff that you wrote, and it sounds like, it seems like kind of cool and fun in the Prohibition, Great Gatsby era, the speakeasy stuff. But like, if you lived through this, and especially as the violence kind of like increased, it would have been very hard to live here and to like conduct a business that was completely legal if like this going around you all the time, if you're being pulled into and stuff. So I guess this is one of the reasons why people really were by the late 50s like ready for this to kind of come to a stop or to be like under control.
Oh yeah, and through the 30s and the 40s, I mean, one would say people knew what they were getting into, and that was part of the game. It didn't affect people that had no business in it, but I think that's where it kind of started to blur the lines, because you had people that felt intimidated that they had to get into it that they otherwise wouldn't, and you had people who
were being approached by the police and also by the mob at the same time,
and they were getting in too deep, maybe with money, or they were gambling, and the gambling was linked to the organized crime, the mob as well. So then those were good people that all they wanted to do was go gambling, and then
found themselves over their heads.
And then they would, if they didn't pay the money, they'd get beat up or they'd get killed to some degree. And that was where I think these were people that were just doing what they wanted to do. Right. But sometimes it was becoming a little bit too violent.
And so the culture kind of like, I mean, the people were like ready for this to kind of come to an end. So in the 50s, that's when the corruption trials took place, and the arrest in Appalachian. We're going to go to a commercial break. So when we come back, I'm going to ask you about the investigator Robert Fisher. He was a special prosecutor. He's like another big character in all of this. We'll also talk to Michael Brown for the No Kings rally on Saturday in Rome. You're on the Hot Seat on a Media Monday. I'm Ron Klopfenstein. We'll have more after the break. This is Ron Klopfenstein, and you're on the Hot Seat on a Media Monday. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. On the next Hot Seat Media Monday, I'll talk to Lorraine Krameyer. She's coming back to tell us about Mr. Figby and all the whimsical delights of Rainbow Land. She'll be joined by children's book author Dave Delakees. That's Monday, April 21st here on the Hot Seat. Also, next week we'll hear from Erin from Erin's Angels. Sheila, I made a mistake with the time she's supposed to call in, but next week we're going to hear about her and about how what they're doing for Child Abuse Awareness Month. But today we're talking to journalist Rocco LaDuca about the mafia in Utica and the Pulitzer Prize that the OD won in the 1950s for writing about the corruption. But now let's check in with Michael Brown. He's in Rome. So Michael, can you tell us about the No Kings rally that's being held this weekend at Fort Stanwix?
Yeah, it's a rally on Saturday at noon o'clock.
Yeah.
And it's going to be at the Revolutionary Era Fort Stanwix, right in the center of Rome, and the parking right across the street from the fort. There's a parking lot right there. We're going to be on the sidewalk just outside of the fort, and the whole rally is, like you said, no kings. We're going to be protesting federal tyranny, and we're going to be it's co-hosted by the United County Democratic Women's Club, the Rome Democratic Committee, and Indivisible Mohawk Valley. We will be we're just telling President Trump that there are no kings in our country. The country belongs to we the people. There are no third terms in our country. There are 2 terms for presidents in our country. We don't make up our own rules when we're president in this country. We follow the rules that are set by we the people. Then we're going to be, bring signs, bring yourself, bring your kids, bring whomever you want.
So,
and
Michael, Michael, I've been to a lot of these things, but for people that have never gone to one, what does someone do like when they go to a rally like this? Like, what do they have to do? What should they know? What should they expect when they get there?
First of all, if you go in and you sign up, if you like, go to the Indivisible Mohawk Valley. You can search for them on Google and go to their website, and they ask you to sign up, and they ask you to sign a pledge that says you're going to be a peaceful protester, and so which just basically means you're going to wave your cars going by, you're going to show your signs, just show your solidarity.
Or just like stand there and be part of the crowd. You can just, you don't have to be like someone who is loud and who's like radical. Just be there just to support the group.
The whole thing about these types of protests is that you are simply there. That you are a face in the crowd. You are a person that's showing up, showing your solidarity with what is being protested.
Right.
And that's powerful.
Yeah. So, Michael, one more time, though, where is it and what is it this Saturday?
It is right at the corner of Erie Boulevard and North James Street in Rome, New York.
Mm-hmm.
It's the No Kings protest. If anybody wants to find out where Google Fort Stanwix.
Yeah.
Stanwix. It's a Revolutionary era fort. It's a national monument right in the center of Rome.
Yep.
It couldn't be a more perfect locale to have a No Kings rally.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, Michael. Well, thank you. I'll be there. I'll have footage of this on my Facebook and social media pages on Saturday. And Rocco, let's go back to you. So, we're in the 1950s.
Thanks,
and yeah, thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
So we're in the 1950s in Utica, and the Falcones have really been able to allegedly capitalize on prohibition. And so from that time period, there's kind of increase, I think, in the buildup of the mafia control, and kind of at the same time maybe an increase in terms of public official corruption. And it's getting to a point where the people of this city are kind of sick of the violence. It's going to be where it's impossible. We're also being seen as the Las Vegas of the East.
So let me go back up a little bit to the 30s. So this is all before World War II. World War II kind of changed a lot of things going into the post-war era in the 50s, and I'll get to that.
Plus prohibition being repealed. Too,
yeah, and so when prohibition was repealed, and then alcohol was legal again, and then Joe Falcone bought a grocery, and so he started to become a legitimate business person.
Yeah.
But in the 30s, when Joe Falcone and Salvatore Falcone were nabbed on federal tax evasion charges for being involved in this illegal bootlegging alcohol manufacturing.
So were they picked up on Appalachian?
No, that was in '57.
Okay.
So this is
This
in the
is
late
before
this
that.
is in the late 30s, before
Okay.
World War II, and they went on trial. And it's just interesting if you look at kind of why this stuff was allowed to fester for a while. In the 30s, the public looked up to these guys, and I included this in day 3 of my mob files, where it highlights, this was in the OD at the time, Salvatore Falcone was 47 years old, and this was described in the newspaper by a reporter, and you could just tell what I'm going to read here, how these people were viewed like celebrities. So as Salvatore Falcone was booked on the tax evasion charges, at the criminal booking, Falcone's handsome tan face glowed in contrast to his white shirt, a reporter wrote fawningly. The newspaper said the stockily built man appeared sartorially perfect and dapper. This was reported. Now, this line I read you in the paper. Yeah. His crisp, curly, graying hair was almost white in the floodlights. His photographers posed him and placed number 13 on him. In his dark blue pencil-striped suit, white shirt, and black tie, with a gray-bordered white pocket handkerchief in his breast pocket, Falcone gave the picture of a quiet, reserved, very dignified businessman.
I love
and
that.
So he went on trial, and they were treated like celebrities. He was convicted on, I think it was Bleecker Street. They had the jail at the time. So for one night, Joe and Salvatore Falcone spent a night in jail.
Yeah.
And then they ultimately got out pending appeal, and it was appealed. It went to the Court of Appeals, then ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court overturned the Falcone's conviction, saying that this was a conspiracy. They were not part of any conspiracy because just because you sell sugar as a grocer to people who are making illegal alcohol, you might have even known that they were doing that. You might have looked the other way, but if you weren't benefiting from their operation by giving them this sugar, you're not really part of the conspiracy. You're just kind of like, well, they're buying sugar and they can buy sugar. So ultimately, they felt that at the time, the government, this was in the 30s when they were going after the mob with a lot of the illegal taxes,
like Elliot Ness type
Al
time
Capone and
period.
stuff. They got them on tax evasion because that was the only way they could really nab some of these people.
Yeah.
And in this case, the Supreme
Was
Court
like
said they
the
overreached.
conspiracy.
Yes, the
was
conspiracy.
How they could, yeah.
Yeah,
And
this-
tax evasion at the time too.
well,
right?
tax evasion was easier if you could
Yeah.
prove it, but they couldn't prove that the Falcones were actually part of a
Conspiring to
conspiracy
make money.
effectively, other
Yeah.
than just selling them these items. So ultimately, it's true to say the Falcones, for what it's worth, the evidence indicated they were part
Yeah.
of this operation, but ultimately their criminal convictions were dropped or
By
overturned,
the
so
Supreme
they are
Court?
innocent men. Yes,
Yeah.
they were not convicted.
Yeah.
So then you had them, and Salvatore Falcone went down to Florida, where he was engaged in some business down there. Joe Falcone
He
stayed
said
here.
he needed air. So.
No, that was Joe Falcone.
Oh, that was Joe. That's
Yeah.
right. Yes, yeah, Joe.
Joe
At
Falcone
the end of
stayed
it,
up
there's some
here.
great quotes from Joe about
Yeah.
that.
Joe Falcone stayed up here and believed that he was a capo, one of the
Yeah.
soldiers or captains in the mafia through the Negadino family out of Buffalo, and so he was kind of running Utica this would have been during the 40s and the 50s,
Yeah.
and then it was during the 50s where you had this rising communism, and that's where kind of things changed.
Yeah.
When you
So
had
like,
this,
how did that impact? Like the fear, like the Red Scare type fears. That
it was,
thing.
and just if you watch these space invaders, the invaders from Mars, that were worried about aliens and UFOs and
Right.
communists and all sorts of stuff, that your country, your community was being infiltrated
Right.
by
right.
people in the shadows.
Yep.
So when the Utica or the mafia was exposed down in 1957 in Appalachian, that's where I think the Red Scare had kind of triggered people in a way that they were freaked out by
To be afraid of conspiracies.
the
and
stuff going on behind
Yeah.
the scenes that was finally exposed. So everything they
Right.
had been told, like, there is no mafia, that doesn't exist. Well, now you couldn't deny it anymore.
Right.
And that's where I think maybe 20 years earlier, in the 1930s or 1940s, that
Right.
wouldn't have made much of a difference. But because of the people were on edge because of communism,
Yeah.
foreigners, that it had a different perspective.
You know, I wonder too if people were more tolerant during Prohibition, because everybody wanted to drink. So like once Prohibition was gone, I think most people stopped being criminals that were, because you think like when alcohol was illegal, most people still drank, and they were breaking the law. So it kind of maybe made them feel like more okay with that.
Well, once the
But once it was legal,
once the illegal bootlegging was gotten rid of, the money
Right.
came in gambling.
I mean, I know
and
it transferred to
bookmaking.
other stuff, but I
Right.
think for like most people probably don't do illegal gambling or even visit a prostitute, but most people do drink. And I imagine like during the Prohibition time, most people still drink. You know, so probably most people were
Yeah,
criminal
they
because of that,
didn't.
so-
I mean, people were dying and being killed as a result of that.
Right.
So people were. It was violent, but it
Right.
wasn't. If all you wanted to do was that the
I
people
mean-
who were drinking it didn't matter.
And what were you going to do? Like go to the cops or go to the paper or go to your mayor and demand that they do something about this when you kind of need them to be there so you can get your vodka?
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Well,
So did that impact things? Like once Prohibition was gone, did people slowly start to be like, "Oh, I don't get involved in that kind of business. We got to clean that up," you know?
when it was in the 1947 when Fred Morelli at the Ace of Clubs nightclub in East Utica got killed outside his car. I guess I don't know if he was well liked, but he was someone who was seen as a legitimate businessman.
Yeah.
And involved in gambling, and then ultimately he got shot and killed for reasons that still remain unclear. The
Right.
newspapers at the time had anonymous letters, and this is just crazy to think, of people who were writing letters back and forth in the paper saying, you keep your mouth shut if you know anything. Or I think one person was saying, whoever's responsible for killing Fred Morelli, turn yourself in, or you're going to be sorry and you'll face the same fate.
Were these published
Yeah.
in the paper? Really?
Yeah,
Like
anonymous
obviously-
letters, right?
I
And
did-
then
wow,
somebody responded and
anonymous.
said, I suggest whoever's out there responding to whatever the letter was, that I suggest you keep in mind that there's no honor among thieves or police stooges, and keep your mouth shut.
Wow.
So they were threatening each other.
So I can imagine back then people like couldn't wait for the paper to come to see what the next thing was.
Well,
gonna be.
the paper was the
It must have been great
big
for
social
sales.
media back then.
I was
That's
gonna
what
say.
was going viral. I mean, when you
But especially with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I can imagine.
So that's where I think the frustration, the pressure from the public was like, there's these people, like everybody's talking about killing each other,
Right.
and you got to do something about it. And the police
Like for civic
department
pride,
was
it's
saying,
not really good.
yeah, that was the pastors at one of them was the Westminster Presbyterian Church.
Yeah.
He was out there with some outcry, and there were some social betterment groups that were asking for the governor to come in there, and the police were essentially saying that's where the public safety commissioner and the police chief were saying, we're doing everything we can. We're not Dick Tracy. We're not whatever. I think that's the one I just remember. That we're not miracle workers here. Yeah, we're doing the best we can, but they really didn't want to solve it because they were part of the problem at the time.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, at that point, the public was just starting to get annoyed with it, but it wasn't until the mob in the 1950s where it was really exposed in Appalachian, where then the public really realized kind of this is unacceptable. There really is something going on here. And then the politics of it as well. The governor from New York City were essentially
his ambitions,
Albany. Yeah, he wanted a Democrat. Avril Ehrman wanted to run for president.
Yep.
And he told the Utica mayor, John McKinnon, you take out your police chief, and I'll take care of the district attorney. And that's how you got the Fisher investigation.
So we're going to get to that when we come back from the break. I'm talking to Rocco LaDuca. He's a journalist and co-host of Talk of the Town on 100.7 FM, Talk FM. You're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. I'm Ron Klopfenstein. I'll have more after the break. This is Ron Klopfenstein, and you're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. On the next Hot Seat Media Monday, Lorraine Krameyer returns to talk about Mr. Figby and all her characters that live in the Rainbow Land. She'll be joined by children's book author Dave Telekis. That's on Monday, April 21st. Today we're talking to journalist Rocco LaDuca. And I was going to say we're going to have a guest in, Sheila Dion from Aaron's Angels, but she will be calling in next week to talk about Child Abuse Prevention Month. So Rocco, let's go back to you. So we left off in the late 1950s, going into the 60s.
So yes, so mainly because you have a lot of interesting things that happen as the mob changed in the 70s and 80s, and ultimately by 1990 its back had been broken, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
But 1960 was kind of around that point, the early 60s and late 50s, when you had the special investigator Robert Fisher come in, and he was the result of Governor Harriman wanting to kind of look tough on crime, so he assigned Robert Fisher to investigate the corruption going on in Utica. And what's interesting is you had, after all of that, it was a couple years, they had trials. The longest trial in Oneida County went 13 weeks. It was in Rome.
Well, my great-grandmother was a juror, yes,
right.
for the prostitution one.
Right.
So she would talk about them, Siggy and there's
Priggy and O'Dowd.
Yes, right.
But so there were, with Robert Fisher, there were 23 indictments and 21 convictions. So there were a lot of people that were punished for this, but Salvatore Falcone was down in Florida. Joe Falcone disappeared. Didn't talk about anything until the end of until all the convictions were wrapped up and the case ended. Then he came back to town and he was asked, "Hey, so Joe, where were you?" "I was down in Florida." He goes, "Is it true you were hiding?" He goes, "No, I was down there at doctor's order. I was in the sun and getting better air for my asthma or whatever." And the elected official said, "Nobody believes that, Mr. Falcone." And he goes, "Well, I'm sorry." So they had.
I just love those Falcones.
So the bottom line is the mob. You call them the mob leaders. The Falcones never got touched. Nobody in the mafia got touched. It was, and Rufi Elephant, although he was tied in all this, is the Democratic kind of dictator or power player in Utica. He didn't get touched by this power broker, right? He wasn't. There's nothing to indicate he was part of the mob or anything. I think they work hand in hand. Essentially, they let each other both operate without giving each other trouble. But Rufi Elephant was tied more with the politics of Utica. The mafia really wasn't, other than if it was how the police handled certain investigations.
Yeah.
So the bottom line, just to wrap up on this and move on to the 70s.
So did it kind of fizzle out? I mean,
well, with the 60s, just the 3 points, the key players in that are really interesting is you had the police chief at the time that essentially he was accused of being incompetent, and I think that was seen as, how did you not know this was you gambling and prostitution and all this going on behind you? And he goes, well, I never saw anything. So he essentially was forced to retire when they found, this is the Utica police chief, Leo Miller, when they found a tin box of $10,000 in his bedroom drawers.
Yeah.
And no one knows how he got that money.
Right.
You can believe he was paid or whatever. The deputy chief, Vincent Fiore, he was caught on tape essentially talking with some of the brothel madams about stay off the phone or be careful what you say. Your lines are tapped, and you know they're
He
going
was
to be
coaching
coming.
them.
Yeah, he was telling them to look out for, don't do anything. You're under investigation now.
Which cops aren't supposed to do.
Right. And when he was asked about it, he said, "Is it true that you told whatever her name is, Miss Burke, to be careful about talking on the phone?" And he goes, "Well, I can't really recall. I don't know if I would have said that." And the guy investigator said, "Well, isn't it problematic if shouldn't you not say anything like that? Shouldn't the answer be no?" He goes, "Honestly, I don't remember." So ultimately, him and several members of the police department were convicted of that type of stuff.
So in a way, like more of the cops got convicted than the criminals.
Yeah, they were.
I mean,
there were
I guess they
a
were
bunch
criminals
of,
too.
A bunch of
but
Utica
like,
police, some
yeah.
investigators. The police chief retired. The United County District Attorney was removed from the governor because it was determined that he had removed a wiretap. His name was Liddy.
Yeah.
The District Attorney Liddy. I don't recall his first name.
That I don't remember either.
But he was. Do I have it here? Not that it's the most important.
So he was removed by.
He was removed because it was believed that Joe Falcone talked to him about removing a wiretap, and
I think Joe Falcone did talk to him about it. Like,
Yeah.
He went right up to him and said, "Can you take this wiretap
Right.
off?" Yeah.
And he was told
So the
to
question
take
was
the
like,
wiretap.
well, how do you know about the wiretap?
And Joe Falcone said that the DA told him, "You have nothing to worry about anymore, Mr. Falcone. We'll leave you alone." So Liddy denies he ever said that, but obviously his reputation was.
I can just imagine smiling on Falcone's face when like he said that.
Yeah.
You know,
So that was the kind of when Joe Falcone
people.
was really still probably.
There should be
like,
a movie or a
There should be.
series. There really should be. You know.
So ultimately, those people all looked bad for Utica and everybody, but didn't look bad for the mafia.
Right.
None of them got
they ended
mad,
up,
right?
they
Yeah.
made up pretty
You
okay
had
with
the
all
big
this.
players in New York City that were
Yeah.
still doing business in New York. So, but a lot of this organized crime and corruption had been shut down. A couple city officials went to prison as well for minor offenses.
But enough to like
relatively
send a
speaking, not
message that from now on we're going to be like more like not corrupt. I mean, at least among like law enforcement.
Right. I'll just read a line from Tony Vella. He was one of the editors at the time, and he got the Pulitzer Prize in 1959.
yeah.
And I interviewed him.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for the names of the people that actually won the prize. I mean, it's like a.
I'll have to find the list here.
Yeah, well, it's okay. Well, Tony Vella's one of them.
Tony
so,
Vella,
yeah.
he said the net result of the state probe was that it increased public awareness of the role politics played in choosing and running city government. That's what I think was the lasting effect. It woke up Utica to get serious about politics. So essentially, it was saying politics is what you have where you have people behind the scenes that are doing things that better themselves, that work their friends, that are like kind of looking the other way. That's the politics, the dirty politics of Utica.
Right.
And the point of all this is that it woke the city up, Utica up to the dirty politics of its city and told them, you need to take this seriously, you need to stop these people, or your city's going to continue to be seen as the Sin City of the East.
Yeah.
So ultimately people say, well, it really wasn't that bad, you never got the mob, it was just minor offenses and stuff like that, and whatnot.
Well, was it that bad? Like, why is Utica known
well, I
for
think
that? Like,
well,
why
I think
not
it was bad as far as
Syracuse
the
or Rome?
murders. Well, I don't know. Don't ask me about Syracuse or
No, I
anything
just
else.
like
'Cause I
wondered
don't
what
have any
was it
expertise in
about
that.
Utica that like became like such a like a fertile ground for this kind of thing.
I think it was probably the Democratic politics here. You had
Like one party total control kind of thing,
Oh.
where like let
well, you
things
had the
happen.
Italians coming in here, and they were, for whatever reason, they were organized in a way
Yeah.
that I think was beneficial to the mafia and bootlegging. I don't know what was
Yeah.
going on in Syracuse.
Right.
But then you had the Democrats that were powerful, and they helped control the elections.
Yep.
And so then if you have elections that are controlling a city at the same time that is kind of allowing this organized crime going on while the police are
Yeah.
looking the other way,
Right,
you're going to have a stronghold for years until the 1950s.
Yep.
So what happened after all of this, by the 1970s, it became more of loan sharking and extortion, where you had people like Joe Falcone were accused of running things.
By
loan-
extortion, would that be like protection of rackets?
Yeah, you were racketeering. You were loaning money out, and if they didn't pay it back, you'd go and threaten them.
So loan
Char-
sharking would be part
Yeah,
of
and
racketeering too.
extortion would be violent. You'd threaten them, you'd beat them up, or
Give
you'd
me
kill
money
them if
or
you
else
didn't pay
I'll
them.
gonna-
Or if
yeah.
you didn't, and that's where it started to get problematic, where in the 70s and 80s, where these were kind of innocent people who were just kind of getting scared or they were
Yeah,
falling on hard
yeah.
times, and they were being killed over small amounts of money.
Right.
And that's where the violence started to get a little too much, and the police really had to do something about it. But ultimately, you had protection money, businesses, they were saying, you pay us a certain amount of money, or we'll make your life hell.
Yeah.
And then when they didn't, or they started to push back, then they sent a message, they either smashed their windows or their goods.
Kneecaps or
yeah,
something.
like that. So one interesting case in 1970 involved Louis King and Carl Meza. They were, there was this individual who was asking for more time to pay back money, and they were sending a message that, no, your time's up. I think he owed like $4,000, and they believed that Joe Falcone was the person who was loaning the money. So ultimately, he was wired at the time. Police were listening to the conversation, or he was an informant. So this individual went back to police. The police caught and arrested Louis King, Carl Meza. They went on federal trial with Albert Marone for loan shark and extortion. And this was one of the most interesting parts in the 70s. Louis King, while he was out on bail, he got grenades, and he wanted to go to the state police investigator's house on Talcott Avenue or Talcott in South Utica, and he wanted to throw the grenade in the investigator's house.
Yeah.
And
the
somehow,
audacity of these people is amazing.
somehow,
you know?
yeah, that's what you were doing in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
These people thought they were invincible.
Yeah.
So what's really crazy is that someone tipped off police that he was going to do that. They set up a dummy in the investigator's house, sitting in the chair, so it looked like he was home.
Yeah.
They let the guy, Louis King, the suspect, go up to the house, throw the grenade into the house. It was a dud. It never blew up. But then all these cops that were hiding start blasting shotguns at him, shooting Louis King.
Oh my gosh.
In the South Utica neighborhood.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, he jumps in the car, a getaway car.
Oh, so he survived that? How did I miss that?
Hold on.
Sorry. Keep going.
He gets shot. He gets in the car to get away, and he wants to go to the hospital. And the guy driving the car, who was also an informant to police, said, "I'm sorry, you're not going there. We're going to the Ramada Inn.
Oh
and
my gosh.
And you're going to die tonight." So he goes to the Ramada Inn, and the Ramada Inn was where the jury was being sequestered in the trial. So as soon as the driver of the vehicle dumps Louis King's body into the parking lot, the police are there and just shoot him 8 more times. Don't offer to help him. There's pictures in the paper.
The
of him
driver or Louis King?
Louis King.
Yeah.
Was dumped in the snowy parking lot of the Ramada Inn where the jury was.
Yeah.
The police get there. They continue to shoot this guy on the ground, hoping to kill him.
Yeah.
They don't help him. There's newspaper pictures of Louis King sprawled.
Yes, we had that picture. Yeah, right.
And they said, we were afraid he had another grenade under him, so we didn't want to touch him. So they were hoping he would die. He didn't. Ultimately, he goes to the hospital. And Louis Brindisi is representing him.
Yes,
and the jury goes into the hospital room with Louis King to listen to his testimony. Ultimately, he's convicted.
The jury must have been like so freaked out.
Well, I don't know.
Probably kind of scared. I mean, you're on a trial.
Probably very fascinating.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you're on like this happens.
Right.
You think like, when am I next?
Well, that's probably why they were sequestered in the hotel. But
yeah.
what was interesting is that
did they know the jury was there?
That was the point, and that was what my
understanding
understanding of all of this is, that the police orchestrated all of this. They wanted it. They wanted it to happen. They wanted the media to be there. That's why all the media was there to get it all. They actually, from my understanding, they called the reporters, said, "You might want to be here. Something's going down tonight." So they let a grenade get thrown into a guy's house.
Wow.
But they put the dummy in, hoping that it would I think it would blow up. But
it
it was
really
a
wouldn't
dud,
be him,
right?
Yeah.
And then they wanted a spectacle at the Ramada Inn to send a message that, the police are blowing away all these bad guys, so knock it off and whatnot. So Louis Brindisi represented him, and that was early in Louis' career of representing these mobsters, I guess. And then in '76, you had Al Marone, who was also part of that group. He wanted to try to take over the Utica mob, but he said he was going to kill everybody, and he was seen as out of control. So then everybody said, we need to take him out.
Less of an appetite for people like that too. I would think the mobsters that came in, they weren't from here. They wanted to take over.
Yeah. And that's where I think the city was getting scared.
Yeah.
Because of this violence was getting too sketchy. But these were essentially, they were shooting themselves. They
Right.
Other than the people who were the bookkeep.
Or the people that kind of fell into borrowing money
borrowing.
and
Or
compulsive gamblers probably got caught up at times
Yeah.
in certain things.
Or the ones who had stores that didn't want to pay protection.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you had Al Marone, this guy who wanted to take over. He gets gunned down in East Utica outside his house. A couple guys, Danny Nappy and Jake Minico, and all of them, they go on trial. They get found not guilty because they didn't believe the informant in that case. So ultimately, they got found not guilty.
Yeah.
And that's where I think really they felt that we're invincible now and we can do whatever we want.
So that's why they think they can throw the grenade through someone's house.
No, this was after.
Oh, this was after that.
This was
Yeah,
after
yeah.
where in the 80s they just started, the violence got bad in terms of, at least the perception of it. You had
I was
Don
gonna say the
Grillo,
perception is right.
and that was in 1979,
Mhm.
where Dominic Brady, he was this guy who got out of prison down in Florida. He's from Utica. Was serving time down there in federal charges, robbery charges. He got out. He claimed to be this born-again Christian. Comes to Utica, wants to take over. Started this cuffs organization to give people who have felony convictions, criminals, another chance to rehabilitate themselves.
Yeah.
He started running a seafood restaurant. He wanted to be a good guy. He was really using this all as a cover to try to take over organized crime in Utica, but make it look like he was a good guy.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the problem back then was that it wasn't just informants. People were tipping off cops. You had tape recordings. Everything was being recorded. Dominic Brady was saying things that suggested he wanted to kill snitches.
Right.
He couldn't escape that. Danny Nappy got caught in that. John D'Amico for killing Don Grillo. They went to prison for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, Louis Brindisi was representing a lot of these guys.
He was like the lawyer for
He was the lawyer for Danny Nappy, Dominic Brady,
Yeah.
and Louis King,
Mm.
and other people involved. And ultimately, in 1983, when Joey DeQuino, young law student, was a new attorney, was in his office on Genesee Street, in Lou Brindisi's office. Somebody went into the office and tied him up, blindfolded him, and shot him a couple times in the head.
I remember that.
And Louis Brindisi, it's not really clear why that happened, whether it was mistaken identity. Some people believe that was supposed to be Louis Brindisi, supposed to be killed, and they got the wrong guy. Other people believe it was this Luigi Burroughs, this drug addict, narcissist down in New York City, who came up here thinking that Louis Brindisi and Dominic Brady were trying to take his idea for some sort of business, and he wanted to take his file back. Ultimately, Louis Brindisi's briefcase was found in this guy's house in New York City, or his apartment.
Wow.
But he was found burnt. This Luigi Burroughs, the alleged killer of Joey DeQuino, was found burned in the back of a car. So who knows who killed him or why he killed him. But the whole story of what happened to Joey DeQuino still remains a mystery because nobody's ever been charged for that and no facts really came out. But Louis Brindisi got out of the business.
That would make me get out of it too.
He claims it was because he realized this
freaked
was
out by
not
it.
right.
Yeah.
Yep. And ultimately, what was the end of that? Also in 1983, Angelo Grillo was gunned down right down the street here in Cornhill at the Regency Lounge, right on James Street. So a masked man went in there with a shotgun, blew him away at the bar. When Louis Brindisi and Benny Rotundo and everybody was at Benny Rotundo's wedding that night, so there were very few police that were out. And ultimately, Angelo Grillo was killed, and nobody was charged with that until the 1990s, 1990, I believe, when the federal government came in, using the RICO, the racketeering law, and just grabbed everybody, all of these loose mobsters that were still out there, and charged them with all these outlying crimes and sent them to prison for many, many years. So that's really...
So is that kind of get into is that kind of how things wrapped up? Was that kind of like the end of the mafia?
The end was that they could take, because the RICO Act allowed them to take past murders, all sorts of things, extortion, loan sharking.
To go look into that and
Well, just lump that anybody who was connected to anything, bombings.
Into one big thing.
One big thing, right.
Yeah,
so it wasn't just you had to go after this person for this. If they were all part of a group that you could link them all, and you just threw all these different crimes, it essentially was like you were throwing them all into the stew and they were all responsible for it. So that's how the federal government ultimately brought the Utica mob to an end.
So that was pretty much the end of all of this then. After that, the criminal gangs are more the drug dealer types, like more like higher,
they
like more
become,
people, like more,
thugs
you know,
and
Yeah, like-
street gangs with
a
drugs.
lot
right?
like more serious and like not the colorful types. Why do you think these people like were so colorful back then? The criminals, like these quotes and these things that they said. Why was it like that back then? We gotta wrap it up. But like, what I liked about this is like the stuff that these people said, like their quotes and like, you know, the talking about
I
like
think they were-
joking with prosecutors. They were like bold and they, you know, like why was it like that back then?
They were arrogant. They believed they were invincible. They had big egos, and when
Yeah.
they thought they could do whatever they want, they could get away with whatever they want. They lived their lives like that, larger than life. And when you live that kind of life, you I think just like our current president, you say
think you
say
can do
things,
stuff,
you say
yeah,
big things.
yeah.
You think you can do whatever you want, and then ultimately it comes up to catch you.
Well, the stories are great, the characters are great, so I hope you like do more with this. Like it's really something that should be like a podcast or a series, or you know, it's really interesting. So, Rocco LaDuca, thank you for being on the show tonight. I will have this up online on Wednesday. We were also joined by Michael Brown. I'll have the video, podcast, and show notes online Wednesday at uticaphoenix.net/Media Monday. Our sound engineer is Jonathan Brooks. DJ J Easy, he's up next. Jim Hale records the show for YouTube and podcast. Nabil Khan is our entertainment correspondent. I'm Ron Kloffenstein. I'll be back next week with another Hot Seat Media Monday.
Thanks, Rob.